Aika and I am a trainee clinical psychologist at Oxford. Today I am talking about a career in clinical psychology. I was inspired to make this video because recently I've been doing outreach workshops in high schools in the local area to talk about a career in clinical psychology, and I realized that a lot of people might not have access to direct outreach workshops like this. The easiest way to ensure equality of access is through videos. Those who have followed me for a while, you know that I already have a video about how to become a clinical psychologist. So if you haven't watched that video already, please do. So in my previous video about how to become a clinical psychologist, I assumed knowledge that you already want to become a clinical psychologist, and I was, I guess, giving advice around how to get there. But I think this video is the step before that, targeting mostly high school students or people who are considering a career change, or people who are aspiring psychologists or therapists that are interested in clinical psychology. What is a clinical psychologist? Clinical psychologists are mental health practitioners. So what they do is work with people who have mental health difficulties. Clinical psychologists meet individuals with a huge variation of mental health needs. This might be common mental health difficulties like depression, anxiety, panic attacks, social anxiety, etc. And also more severe and enduring illnesses like psychosis, bipolar, personality disorder. We also work with people who have neurological conditions and physical health conditions. So for example, if you might have a spinal cord injury or you might have dementia, then clinical psychologists also work with these groups of people. We also work with people who have addiction issues or substance misuse issues, and also people who have neurodevelopmental difficulties, say autism spectrum disorders or intellectual disabilities, etc. So what do clinical psychologists actually do? We provide evidence-based treatments or therapy sessions, which are usually talking therapy based. So you and the client or clients sit in a room or on Zoom and you talk. We base this off the most evidence-based treatments. So this might be CBT, DBT, ACT, CFT. We also might be involved in assessing people. So this might be to triage someone into different services, signposting them, or even at the point of diagnosis, as clinical psychologists might be involved in that. In short, psychologists provide evidence-based interventions, and they also do clinical assessments as well. On top of that, they might also do other things like consultations with, say, medical professionals, providing them with indirect consultations to help a person, or they might help with staff training to increase psychological knowledge. So clinical psychologists don't just work with individuals. A lot of the times they might also work systemically, which means working with families, with staff teams, with schools, and with generally the system around a person in order to help them through whatever difficulties that they are presenting. Clinical psychologists also might be involved in research. Doctorate training, at least in the UK, require us to conduct independent research. So a lot of people, once they qualify, also are engaged in academic institutions to become not only consumers of research, but also producers of research. And naturally, leading on to that, clinical psychologists might also work in an academic setting to be tutors for future trainees, or also do some guest lecturing. Clinical psychologists also work in a huge variation of different settings. So you have psychologists that work in community settings, so that might be with social workers, might be doing home visits, or might be seeing people who come into community services, or they might work in inpatient mental health settings, which are when people are sectioned under the Mental Health Act because they are too at risk of themselves or to other people, which I know is very, very different to community work. They might also work in, say, prisons and also physical health hospitals integrated into a physical health team. They might also work in charities. So clinical psychologists, mostly in the UK, are hired by the NHS, but there's a sizable proportion of clinical psychologists who also work privately, and even bigger proportion that work both privately and within the NHS. Okay, so at this point, I really wanted to talk about the difference between a clinical psychologist and a psychiatrist. Obviously, we always, as clinical psychologists ourselves, we are always shocked to know that people don't really know the difference, but I remember so well that I didn't know the difference either when I was a teen. A psychiatrist is medically trained. They are a medical doctor who's gone through 6 years of doctoral training to become a medical doctor, and then they specialize into psychiatry, or they do their foundation years and then specialize into psychiatry afterwards. So that's a psychiatrist. They are medically trained, and therefore they can also prescribe psychotropic medications like antidepressants, anti-anxiolytics, antipsychotics, or the psychotropic medications. They are largely focused less on talking therapies. Now this is probably like a recent, I mean like last 20-40 years, where psychiatrists are more focused on the medical side of things with the psychological component and do less of the talking therapy side of things. On the other hand, clinical psychologists also have a doctoral degree, but they are not medical doctors. Usually after a psychology undergraduate degree, aspiring clinical psychologists might then work in the industry, the healthcare sector for a few years, and then they apply to a doctorate in clinical psychology, which is a 3-year course in the UK. And once you go through that and qualify, then you become a clinical psychologist. You still have the doctor in front of your name, but you're not a medical doctor. And I think the biggest distinction here is that they can't, as of now in 2022, can't prescribe medication. And they are trained in all the, as I said before, evidence-based therapeutic approaches. They might also be trained in other approaches like psychoanalytic psychotherapy or systemic therapy, or loads of other different therapies. Safe to say a lot more well-versed in the talking therapies arena. Money isn't everything, but just to let you know about the journey and everything about money, to be very honest, you don't earn a lot as a pre-qualified or a pre-doctoral graduate of psychology. A lot of the jobs you get might be very close to the minimum wage or slightly above that, unless you're a research assistant. So a lot of the support worker roles or assistant psychologist roles range at around 18,000 to around 24,000. And if you're lucky, there might be band 5 assistant psychologist roles, which go up to like say 30,000. If you are a research assistant, which is also a common job that you can get after graduation, then it can go up to 32,000 in London. Just a caveat with this, there's a lot of new training roles that are above this level, so it might be starting at 25,000 for like a training role, like a psychological wellbeing practitioner, or other types of roles like these. Please watch my video of jobs I wish I knew about in my channel already, and you can find them, and there's like new ones coming out every year, and I can't keep up with it. On training, on a doctorate, you have a base salary that does not change for 3 years, which is around £31,000. And you get a little bit more if you train in London because of the London weighting. So this might go up to like 36,000, 37,000. As a qualified psychologist, it can go up to 100-something thousand. Rumor has it. Overall, in terms of job security, in my opinion, the clinical psychologist's job security is very high right now, because there's an increased recognition in society, or at least British society, that mental health is a very pressing topic. There's a lot of areas that clinical psychologists can provide a lot of value for, and in fact they're necessary. They're not even an optional option anymore. People are more and more valuing the role of clinical psychology in healthcare. So clinical psychologists in general are in high demand right now. Job security is strong. There are certain areas that might be in high demand. So for example, places like psychologists who work with dementia or learning disabilities, or even places like clinical health psychology that are expanding quite rapidly. Step-by-step tips to clinical psychology. Let's start with A-level. Once you're ready to apply, you go into this website called Clearinghouse. You apply to 4 universities of your choice. Once you go through all the selection tests and interviews and etc., and you get in, you have a 3-year contract with that university or that trust, and you become a trainee clinical psychologist. So as a trainee clinical psychologist, you are contracted for 3 years, and you are required to do, at least now, around 5 placements. Now this varies across different doctorate programs based on whether they're competency based or like placement based. So it kind of works like a doctor rotation program where you like go through different specialisms or areas in psychology. You rotate around it, get your competencies, and then specialize in your final year. As for now, the 4 different core placements are children and adolescents, working age adults, older age adults, and intellectual disabilities. And then your 5th placement usually would be a year long, or you can split that into 2 specialist placements and you choose specifically what you want to go into to do your final year. Final year can be very broad. You can specialize into forensic, you can specialize into neuropsychology, you can specialize into eating disorders, you can specialize into bariatric surgery, you can specialize in a lot of different things, but it really depends on what the course and what the area that your course is offers. Once you finish those 3 years of training, hooray, you've become a clinical psychologist. When you add it up, it's a lot of years. 3 years of undergraduate degree at least, and then around 1 to X amount of years getting experience, clinical or research, and then you have to do another 3-year doctorate program in order to qualify. So that can, its shortest is around 7 to 8 years to start from start to finish, or it can go up to 12, 15 years in order to qualify as a psychologist. So I just want to be realistic here. It is a long and arduous journey. It's possible, but it can be very unstable for a lot of people, and it comes with a lot of ups and downs as well. And it means that you might have to spend a lot of years in jobs that are underpaid based on the qualifications and abilities that you have, whilst you watch your friends in marketing jobs or other jobs being paid double the amount. And yeah, that can be really difficult to watch. However, I must say that those are the jobs that usually become your formative years of learning what type of psychologist you want to be, and all the lessons that you learn in these pre-qualified stages are extremely valuable even during training and after training. So I wouldn't want anyone to think that it's only the years during formal training when you're paid as a trainee clinical psychologist that matters. All the years before that is still equally, if not more important than the actual training years, where you're just trying to meet the specific competencies to become what we think are clinical psychologists. So my first top tip is focus on getting the best grades that you can at high school and to get into a university, and try to get the best grades there as well. This will just give you that extra edge because doctorate programs in the UK are, at least in clinical psychology, are extremely competitive. A lot of people have first class degrees or high 2-1 degrees, and you want to be in that group so you don't get selected out from the beginning. I guess this varies a lot because some doctorate programs don't actually select that way, but just in general, I think, yeah, the primary thing is to focus on getting that good grade to show your academic competence and to give your application more weight. Then second top tip I suggest is to get as much relevant experience as possible. This might be volunteering, maybe once a week, doing listener at Samaritans, or volunteering at Mind, or different kinds of mental health charities that you might find in the local area. There's a huge variation of things that you can get, just like bits of doing person-facing roles where you are also in a caring role, and to really understand whether clinical psychology is the right place for you, and also to understand what preferences you have within clinical psychology. So it's the time to really experiment and try. And I think beyond that, also try to get some experience, voluntary experience, doing research. So say you're at university, just cold message lots of professors to see if they have any research projects going around, so that you can get involved in some maybe clinically relevant research experiences. All of these will then snowball to help you get that graduate job. This is also a time for you to figure out whether clinical psychology is right for you. You might do research and end up feeling like, oh, actually I want to do a PhD in clinical psychology instead of a clinical doctorate where you practice as a psychologist. Or you might go horizontally to other caring roles that are mental health related, like mental health social worker or mental health nursing. So it's really about trying to approach people that are already in the field by working in those areas to see, do I want to do this? Third top tip is everything about psychology is slowly but surely exploding on the internet. So follow the relevant Twitter pages, follow the relevant Instagram pages, follow people on LinkedIn that are very actively talking about clinical psychology, and really understand what the topics, the trending topics in clinical psychology are now. So say anti-racism work, diversity, lived experiences, climate anxiety, all the things that are currently trending topics, just to again understand whether you actually want to be a psychologist and be involved in these conversations in the future, just to get that knowledge so that come interview you are able to show that you are truly passionate about this field. By following these, again, also another huge addition is that there's a lot of free talks out there now. There's a lot of free talks where you get to speak or listen to a qualified clinical psychologist or trainee clinical psychologist or anyone doing mental health work, like a mental health practitioner of any sense, so you can have a taster of what's required to be in those jobs. My fourth tip is that the journey is long and arduous, so really make sure that you have a plan B, a safety net, whether it be working as a mental health practitioner in other roles, say what I just said, mental health social worker, mental health nurse, different types of therapists as well. Really think about alternative routes. Clinical psychology is not the only place that you can help people. There's a gazillion other ways that you can help people and their mental health, and I'd really urge you to really consider your options before committing into clinical psychology. Clinical psychology is not the only way to help people. There are 100 million other jobs where you are working with people and helping them improve their mental health. A lot of people think that the route to clinical psychology is way too risky, way too long, way too expensive, and ultimately possibly not worth it. There are a lot of people who might have applied 3 times in a row or 4 times, 5 times, and they still haven't been able to get in. I really want to urge you guys to think about alternative careers that are possibly less risky, where you can satisfy the same values and the same passions of helping people or working with the mind and the body. Just as a whistle-stop tour of all the different types of jobs you can get that are mental health related but not in clinical psychology. Number 1 is mental health social worker, and be in various different programs that I have already talked about in another video. Just have a look at that. You can be an adult social worker, you can be a child social worker, and it's a very rewarding job, very stressful but very rewarding job that is also mental health related. Another one is mental health nursing. This is providing medical and nursing care for people who are struggling with their mental health. So obviously it's slightly different angle, but again, a lot of mental health nurses might go on to become CBT therapists or other talking therapy training because there are like different programs that allow them to like push forward with this angle. Thirdly, there's other psychologist roles, so other qualified psychologist roles, so not just clinical psychologists. There are counselling psychologists where you go through doctorate of counselling psychology. Now the main difference between clinical and counselling psychology essentially, in my opinion, is just whether it is funded or not. So counselling psychology doctorate is not funded. A doctorate of clinical psychology is funded. A lot fewer people talk about doctorate of counselling psychology, but it's an equally viable route if you can afford it. Like I can imagine it's really expensive, and that's a huge deterrent for a lot of people, including myself. And you have other things like sports psychologists or occupational psychologists, forensic psychologists, where you have to do, I think, a doctorate degree or a master's degree. I'm not too sure about that, but you can again research what the requirements are to become a forensic psychologist. A health psychologist again has like different criteria that unfortunately I'm also not very familiar with. I guess that's just a whistle-stop tour of all the different kinds of psychologists, qualified psychologists there are, and that my main point is that clinical psychology is not the only way. Lastly are therapists. So you don't get the psychologist title, but essentially a lot of times you're doing very similar things. This might be art or music therapists, so these are usually a little bit more psychodynamically oriented. You might be a CBT therapist, but you might train as a psychodynamic psychotherapist. You might train as a psychological wellbeing practitioner, a clinical associate psychologist, an educational mental health practitioner, and the list goes on and on and on and on. I've just listed a lot and I didn't explain any of them, but hopefully maybe if you want to look at these roles and really explore what you want to do and look at their job descriptions and requirements, you can just rewind and just search up all the different job roles that I just mentioned. A lot of people use these practitioner roles, even CBT roles, as a stepping stone into clinical psychology, either as a plan B or as a route that they take until they get onto the clinical psychology doctorate. There's controversy around whether that should be ethical or whatever, but I think given how arduous the journey to clinical psychology is, I think it's very common for people to take up these other roles either as a secondary option or as a primary option, and they're not even interested in being a clinical psychologist. Fifth tip is start getting experience as early as possible. Every single experience counts. They snowball into further opportunities or further chances in interviews or statements where you can draw on those experiences and really reflect on them and show that you do have those competencies for that specific job role. That's whether that be during doctorate applications or any kind of roles before that usually lead to success in the doctorate applications. Every experience counts, and that doesn't only include work experiences, that includes life experiences as well. So I'd really recommend you to really reflect on your life experiences and drawing some connections between your personal life and your professional life and your identity in the future as well. At the end of this, I would like to signpost you to more information. I don't really have Twitter, but a lot of things happen on Twitter. A lot of talks are offered on Twitter. A lot of jobs might be offered on Twitter or research opportunities. So I really recommend you have a Twitter account. I'm a little bit of a hypocrite because I don't have a Twitter account, but yeah, I think Twitter is where things are happening. You might also want to join what I already mentioned, which is a doctorate group on Facebook. It's the Clinical Psychology Doctorate Applicant Group, which has around 6,000 members, and if you have any questions, you just write them there and someone will answer. Or you can go, if you're a little bit shy, you can just go on the search box, type in some keywords, and very likely someone has asked the same question, if not the exact same question that you have. On Twitter, you might want to follow DCP Pre-Qual, which is the Division of Clinical Psychology Pre-Qualification Group. If it's relevant to you, the Minorities Group. On Instagram, you can follow hashtags like DClinPsy, Doctor of Clinical Psychology, Trainee Clinical Psychologist, Psychologist of Instagram, British Psychological Society, and the list goes on. On this YouTube space, there are other clinical psychologists that are also doing YouTube. It's not just me. Lastly, if you want some really dry information about the actual doctorate courses, you might want to go on the Clearinghouse website. Confusingly is a Leeds University website. Leeds University runs a Clearinghouse, so just search Clearinghouse on Google and you'll be able to find it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that this video kind of explains a little bit more about clinical psychology. Apologies if I'm not the most succinct person, but if you do have any questions or anything that I haven't mentioned, and I'm sure there are many things I haven't mentioned, please feel free to comment down below and I will try to answer the questions. If not, someone else will try. If you're a little bit shy, just feel free to DM me on the Oxford Psych, which is the Instagram page that I have, or email me on the oxfordpsych@outlook.com, I think is my email. Hopefully I have encouraged you more than discouraged you into a journey into clinical psychology, and if not, you have had a good taster of all the different alternatives. Thanks so much for listening, and goodbye.